ReZero is a show I have a long history with on this channel. Despite being one of the most highly regarded and popular isekai series of all time, I reviewed this show multiple times and I've always given it very negative reviews, said I hated it, said it's cringy, said I don't understand why it's so popular, and just attack the fan base and stuff like that. And what makes it kind of different from something like Attack on Titan, where I didn't like it the first time, but I thought it was amazing the second time, is I had actually watched and reviewed this show multiple times previously. And the second time I watched it, I actually disliked it more than the first time. And then the third time I watched it, my opinion has kind of changed quite a bit, and we're going to go into that. But I just think that that's kind of interesting. And whenever we're talking about stuff like this, I almost find it as interesting to kind of go into the reasons why somebody feels a certain way towards something as to what their actual feelings are, and kind of maybe do a bit more of a meta-analysis. So that being said, let's just kind of get into it. So at a very high level, I think I can define my issues I have with this show, both in terms of liking it and disliking it. They're kind of related to some other, I don't know if you want to call them artists or directors or creators. There are a lot of people who are very creative and very talented, but if there's not someone to put a leash on them, if there's not someone there to like tell them no, or to edit stuff out, or to be like, this is a bad idea, or there's just something that they really like to put in, some like quirky stuff, but isn't really good for the viewing experience, if they don't have an editor there to put a leash on them, then they're going to destroy it, even if they're very talented. The ultimate example of this I like to give is Michael Bay. Michael Bay is, in my opinion, a very talented director. He's very good with camera work, he's good at action scenes, he's good with special effects. I know he's known for like the explosions and all that kind of stuff, but he is good at it. He is one of the better action directors in Hollywood. That being said, Michael Bay shoves like really inappropriate, like bad humor in. There's random tangents. Like he just puts in like just a lot of just excessive stuff that bloats his movies and doesn't really add anything into it. So you take something like Transformers 2, and that's where Michael Bay had no leash, and the movie's completely unfocused, and you have like the black robots, and you have like Demolisher or whatever with the balls and stuff. And then you have something like, what was it called? 13 Hours Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, where it's very focused, it's very tight, and it really makes a lot of good use of his talents. And you can really see kind of his talent there. Zack Snyder, I find, is also a lot like that, where he's very talented, but he needs somebody to put a leash on him. George Lucas might be the ultimate example of this. Keep in mind, George Lucas made both Revenge of the Sith and Phantom Menace. I feel like Phantom Menace was George Lucas with nobody telling him no, and Revenge of the Sith was him, where he was a lot more restrained and trying to stick to the actual story. And I think the author of ReZero is very much like that. He is very talented in terms of writing characters and having kind of complex timelines and complex plots. But when he's not like reined in and he's not restrained, then you can just get this spiral of self-indulgence that just kind of threatens to ruin the show. And I think season 2 of ReZero is really an example of the author with like no editing and without anybody telling him no. Because you have the stuff that kind of irritates me about the show turned up to 11. So maybe let me just kind of talk about what I mean by that. So in past, I've criticized this show for being too much of a deconstruction of other isekais. And this is very much supposed to be taking the genre, flipping on its head, trying to subvert every expectation possible, that sort of thing. And a lot of that is good and a lot of that works. I do feel when he's doing this, though, if there's an opportunity to nerf Subaru more, to make him suffer more, to put in another death loop, to make an expectation not go the way you want it to, or to have the story advance, or to have like a good moment, he will always pick the former. And I did feel watching this for a third time that there was a lot of padding. I feel like for every one of the arcs, they could have removed at least one or two death loops and kind of simplified it a bit. And it would have had to take some of the torture porn out, and it would have had to take some of the misery out, but it would have made the narrative a lot tighter, and it would have kind of reduced some of it. Likewise, he and this is what a lot of people who write similar stuff are like Kishimoto's guilty of this, whoever the guy who writes Bleach is guilty of this. This isn't shonen, but it's something very a problem with a lot of shonen, where they just introduce a ton of random side characters who might not even be that important after when they're introduced, and they all get their own backstory, and it takes up a lot of time. And a lot of time, these characters are more interesting than the main characters. But I just find this show just takes it up to 11 when you're dealing with introducing side characters. Like in season 1, we introduce all the other like royal selection candidates. Like you have Anastasia who gets introduced, and she's like a little bit relevant in the story, and then she's just not in the next couple arcs. You have Cruche who gets introduced, then her name gets eaten, so she's not relevant anymore. There's just like a bunch of random characters that they introduce in season 1, and then they just aren't in the subsequent seasons, and it just feels like it took up a lot of time. Season 2 is like I said, very much feels like there was no editing. There was no one who told the author no. There was no one who said maybe we should cut this. Because you just have so many minor characters, and I don't really have an issue with any of them per se. Like you have Frederica, you have Garfield, you have what that lolly pink girl, you have like 6 or 7 different witches, you have Amelia's backstory, you have Otto. You just have so many like different characters' backstories and different side characters and stuff. And none of it's really like bad. I didn't really dislike any of it, but I just felt like it dramatically bloated season 2. And you could have almost gotten season 2 down to just like maybe 2/3 the number of episodes that they did if they had have just edited it down a bit. And once again, I just felt there was too many deaths, there was too many loops, stuff like that. So I do think the author is very talented. I just think there's an issue with him not being like having an editor restrain him. At least when they're adapting it to an anime, I think they probably could use someone to kind of take a machete to it and kind of reduce or simplify things. On that note, something else I said about this show is it's kind of like a waifu simulator, wherein they introduce like every like subtype possible. Like you have the naive, beautiful girl with low self-esteem. You have a variety of different lollies. You have the capitalist girl. You have the Prussian mommy GF waifu and her Groiper second in command. You have the femdom, orange-haired girl who wants you to lick her foot. You have the like girl next door, cute, bubbly, wants to be your mommy GF and cook for you and take care of you because she thinks you're like quirky and goofy. You have the hot girl from the countryside who's moved into the big city and is ashamed of her roots, and also for some reason is like a quarter beast and has big sharp teeth. Like I do think that while I do like most of these characters on their own, there is part of the whole like subversive thing that we're going to introduce as many like waifus to be part of Subaru's harem that's not actually going to exist as possible, as like part of the whole we're subverting expectations, guys. We're just going to introduce more and more potential members of Subaru's harem, but they're not actually going to be part of his harem. That's how brilliant we are. That's what a genius I am. And I just get that impression from a lot of this show. Is I like a lot of aspects of it, but it just does seem very self-indulgent. It seems very much like we could cut down on the number of characters. We could cut down on the amount of like random side tangents. You could cut down on the number of death loops. You could cut down on the number of times that Subaru just dies in horrendous ways. Sometimes when I'm watching this show, just some of the loops feel kind of superfluous, and I kind of forget where I even am in them. So that was kind of what my criticisms were. So I'm trying to think of like, why do I like it now? Why did I hate it before, but now I really enjoy it? I think part of it is when it comes to a lot of things like this, something that makes me like a series a lot more is I like to get into like lore and mysteries and weird stuff and weird kind of like behind the scenes things where, oh, is this character actually this character? Is there some relationship between them? Especially something like ReZero where so much of the show is about subtext and secrets and things like that. I really kind of have to start to get into that and try to start to like read the theories and stuff to really start to like something. I think that happened with like Attack on Titan, for instance. We're just watching the show the first season. I didn't really like it that much. But after the subsequent seasons had come out and the manga was a lot further along, and there was a lot more lore and a lot more depth as to how things connected to each other. I think that's also like with this show, where when the first season came out, the manga was a lot, or the light novels, I think, were a lot further behind, or there just wasn't as much information available about them. But now that like season two's come out and stuff, there's a lot more just stuff you can read or videos you can watch on YouTube, and I do enjoy kind of getting into that. Also, just a lot of the stuff you're presented with in the show is very oblique, and they don't really explain it. And part of that is, once again, I think trying to subvert expectations and trying to be realistic that it's an isekai and you're seeing it through Subaru's perspective and that kind of thing. But like knowing about the background, knowing a bit about how the world works, knowing a bit about where the plot's going, I find it really does a lot to help it out. I think another aspect of why I dislike this show so much, and I'm readily willing to admit it, is I have a tendency to counter signal or to dislike things because they're popular. Part of that is, so I'm in an interesting position because I review a lot of stuff like anime and movies and video games and stuff. And this sector is overwhelmingly filled with people who have completely different political and religious views to me. So whenever I see someone do a video on something like this, it makes me dislike it by kind of association, and it's weird because I kind of have fairly normie tastes in terms of the kind of movies and shows and games I like and stuff like that. But most of the people who do normie reviews kind of repulse me with the spin they put on it. So I think with ReZero, part of it was honestly just a lot of the people who were saying it was great were people I really disliked. And a lot of their takes on it I found were really repulsive. I also kind of hate it whenever there's something that people are just like, love, and they can't say, oh, I like this, it's really good, but maybe there's a couple issues with it, or let's talk about it. I found this, like in maybe Attack on Titan and some other shows, where a lot of the fans will just not admit there's anything wrong with it. They won't, like, allow any criticism. They'll just yell, it's perfect, it's the greatest thing ever. And I do admit I just feel kind of an urge to counter signal against that, or to just kind of go, no, it's not as good as you think it is. That sort of thing. I think another aspect about this show, and this is an issue that I have with a lot of anime. It's not really the fault of the anime or whatever, but Welcome to the NHK is definitely one of the best anime manga series ever created. It's just that it's very hard to watch because you find a lot of aspects of it as the average kind of person who watches anime, or the average millennial, even if you have a job and you're not a hikikomori or whatever, you see too much of yourself in Saito. You see many of your own flaws, and it just really makes you cringe. And that's kind of an issue with ReZero. And once again, that's not really the fault of um, the author for being able to portray kind of what millennials and Gen Z are like in a very accurate way, and kind of portray the troubles they go through and how they're messed up. and kind of what post-modernity's done to them. It's not the fault of the author or the show, but it does mean that it's often very uncomfortable. So is Subaru's a very accurate representation, at least of kind of the millennials I know in North America. I'd imagine especially so in Japan. And he's a very accurate representation of a lot of people's common failings, of the people who think they're special, of the people who are like grew up in a online environment and are somewhat socially awkward and don't really know how to interact in person. And it's an accurate portrayal of that, but that makes it kind of hard to watch at times because it reminds you too much of yourself. And you kind of, at least for me, I'm someone who tends to over-identify. I don't know if it seems like that, but I tend to be a very empathetic person. So I normally over-identify with whatever the main character is and what I'm watching. So whenever I'm watching Subaru, like particularly in season 1, just kind of being Subaru, it can be very just kind of painful to watch. Because it reminds me of what I was like at that age, and it reminds me of some issues I still have personally. And that's just very like awkward, like I said. It's not, once again, it's something that takes a little getting used to. You kind of get desensitized to cringe. So a lot of ReZero, particularly ReZero Season 1, is really cringy, just with the way Subaru acts. Initially, I really hated that, and it's still kind of hard to watch, but I'm not saying But my point is that it doesn't make the show bad. It doesn't make the writing bad. And it's not really a reason to kind of to say the show's bad. It's a reason to maybe say it's not for you. I hope that kind of makes sense. It's like that with a lot of things that are in high school or otherwise involve characters that are too similar to you. Is it can kind of cause an over-identification where you kind of feel a sense of repulsion towards it, or you don't want to accept that that's maybe an accurate representation of what you yourself are like, and it kind of pushes you back. So I think that's partially why I disliked this show so much initially, was Subaru is a very good and well-written character. It's hard to watch as a millennial. And I think that's kind of, once again, the point. So I'll do another video talking about what I like about the show, but I just kind of wanted to maybe take a step back and analyze why did I have such a negative reaction? How have I kind of figured out where I was coming from, and how have I kind of worked through some of that so I can properly enjoy this show for its merits as opposed to whatever kind of the meta stuff is involved with it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless, and more content to come.